Good morning and welcome to our webinar here today. My name is Pippa Shepherd. I'm Head of Customer Engagement here at IRN Legal, and I'm joined by David Mort from IRN Legal Reports, part of IRN Research. Good morning, David.
Hello, and hello, everybody.
Well, thank you so much for joining us to share the key results of two of your fantastic surveys that you do. And as you know, I love these surveys and get huge amounts out of them. You've got an opportunity later to tell us a little bit more about these reports and what you do. But thank you so much for joining. Now, you've got the pleasure of me today. You've been interviewed the last couple of years by the IRN, David. But hopefully it would just be as insightful and useful to all the delegates here today listening to your report feedback. So what are we going to cover today? Well, the first thing we're going to look at is your consumer report. So this is all about the consumer trends from the UK wills and probate market consumer research report. We'll then look on and have a bit of a discussion about the industry trends, and that's uncovering the UK wills, probate and trust market report. So two key reports here with some fascinating insights. So if we take the consumer one first, if that's okay, David, let's see what our clients, your clients are thinking about at the moment and what dynamics are starting to shape their buying habits. So we have some top line stats to share here today. So 35% of adults have a will. And that increases to 61% when you look at the over 65s. 1.86 million people wrote a will last year, and that increases by another 3.8 million who wrote one between 1 and 2 years ago. Now 15.5 million, so 45% of those adults who don't have a will have just not got round to doing it. And I think that's fascinating, David, from what we look there. So overall, we see the percentage of adults with a will is hardly changing, but looking at the reports, the habits of those doing a will are changing, the appetite to doing one is changing. So there's quite a few themes to discuss here, aren't there? So reading through, I picked up on 4 key themes, one about convenience, one about price, one about the changing demographics, and one about expanding portfolio of products there. So if we delve into the convenience piece, since the last survey in 2020, there's been a big increase in the number of adults that would be comfortable with online consultations and the online witnessing of wills, which is interesting. If the process was more convenient for consumers, do you think that more of that 40% of adults that don't do a will would actually complete one?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I think the answer is yes, because convenience. If you look at other legal practice areas, for example, conveyancing, and to a lesser extent family law, it's already happening there. We're seeing the use of online delivery services, for example, increasing quite a lot, and I think it's happening. It's starting to happen in the wills market. I think the issue with the wills market is not so much the consumer, but actually the supplier. And it's that kind of 6,000 plus law firms that offer wills in particular. I know other people offer wills, but if you focus on the law firms, a lot of those, great majority of those are high street law firms who probably are dealing with a relatively small number of wills year by year. And I think the impetus there is, well, is it worth going down the online delivery route for just a relatively small number of wills? I think the consumers are ready for it. The figures suggest that 63% will be happy with a video consultation on their wills, for example, which is higher than it's been in any other survey. And 62% will be happy with video witnessing of their wills. So the impetus is definitely there for consumers to go down it. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think the holdup might be the suppliers themselves.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. When we look at that then, so 6,000 solicitor firms, what do you think they would need to do to grab their clients, if you like, in that scenario? Because that's if clients are going one way and going towards the convenience of online, and they don't match that, then that's going to be a tricky situation, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, if I'm honest, I think the wills market and the probate market will end up like all the other markets, and it's already starting. We'll have a group of volume players who will obviously embrace online solutions, digital solutions to these services. And then you'll have a big bunch of law firms. Traditionally, we call them the high street solicitors, which I think they still are essentially.
Yeah.
Some of those will embrace it because they're dealing with enough wills and probate issues a year, but a lot of them won't. And I'm not sure you will encourage them. I'm sorry to say that, because I know Arkan will be hugely disappointed with that. But if you take a look at a typical high street law firm, which is not a particularly big one, it's got personal injury, family law, conveyancing, wills and probate, maybe a bit of employment law. And traditionally, it has always been, well, if you've got a legal problem in the local area, we can solve it. But if you asked a high street law firm, or a lot of them, where their revenue and profits were coming from, I could guarantee it would not be will writing, because they don't do enough. It's low fee, it's low margin. So I'm not sure where the cutoff point is, but I think there is a cutoff point in the industry where you will see them move towards digital solutions, because they're doing enough wills. But the rest of the law firms will either carry on as they are, doing a few wills a year, not making much money out of it, or they'll get rid of their will service altogether. So I think of that 6,000, I don't know how many there are. We haven't done any research on it, but I suspect there are maybe 3,000, let's say, that actually would be open to digital solutions, but maybe the rest you're never going to catch, really.
Yeah, I think there's different ways of engaging with digital solutions. It doesn't have to go the whole hog. They can digitize some of their practices.
Yep.
I think that probably leads us really nicely on to the second point from the consumer survey picking up, and that is about price.
Yeah.
You talked about price there, and what comes across very strongly within the survey is that fixed fees are really dominating now, and that median fee there you're looking at is about £100, and the marginal decrease from around 110 to 115 in the previous survey. So we are seeing that price pressure and that price being driven down. So wills, as you rightly just pointed out, are becoming less profitable. Fixed fees now dominating that market. So what other ways could that high street solicitor, or indeed anybody that's doing wills, actually make those wills more profitable?
Yeah, I think the way I see it is we should almost stop talking about wills as a kind of separate service. Yeah. And given what the consumer survey says, and we'll come on to it, I know that people are interested in other services. I think we have the successful firms going forward. And I know I'm only talking about law firms here. I do appreciate there's lots of other people offer will writing services. Yeah. But I think it's true of all of them, actually. I think the successful ones will have to take a more holistic approach and start to offer a package of services that includes will writing, if I'm being honest. And again, there are obviously a lot of complex wills. There are wills that are contested, which create more fee. But I think if we're talking about the kind of standard will that most people have, that has to become part of a much broader package of services, I think. I know your report on inheritance wealth that you see as being a big issue in the next few years, that a lot more adults will be getting a lot more wealth pushed towards them because of
great big wealth transfer that's coming through.
Yeah. I think that will push a lot of more providers in this market to think about this kind of holistic approach. Yeah, because it'll be financial planning, it'll be personal planning, and wills will be part of that process. They won't.
It's the wider estate plan, isn't it?
Yeah, there won't be a standalone service for the successful ones, I think. Will be.
And as we see that great wealth transfer coming through, I mean, I think the figures are about 5.5 trillion in the UK over the next 30 years or whatever it happens to be. As we see that come through, I do think we're also seeing, we come on to changing demographics in a minute, but just that, the increase in blended family, the increase in wealth that's going to come from this great wealth transfer, and that will actually raise the need for other types of documents. It's not just the will, as you say, it's expanding that out. You know, it might be the other services that are coming in that we see in your report, but just things like the need for trusts and inheritance tax planning, which is, you know, a higher value than the fixed price.
Yeah. And I think they will, you know, that's basically what I'm saying. It will have to be a much broader range of packages. And I can see the successful ones actually. You know, at the moment, if you're a traditional will writer, you basically talk to a person and say, okay, we can write your will. Oh, and by the way, we can offer these additional services, you know, which in the old days was will storage, still is a bit, but you know, other things like lasting powers of attorney, whatever it might be, funeral plans. I can see that switching around, and the good providers going along and saying, well, yeah, you've now got this inheritance. You need to think about financial planning. You need to think about personal planning. You need to think about planning for your family. And then, by the way, have you thought about making a will as part of this process? I can see it all switching around for the successful one. I agree with you.
Absolutely. So I suppose that brings us neatly on to changing demographics. So looking at the survey, there's a higher percentage of younger adults compared to the survey average that have made a will in the last 12 months. So we can see that, you know, younger adults are more likely to use search engines to find services, but recommendations are still very important to them. So recommendations is a key one there. And I'm just picking out here 43% of 18 to 24-year-olds and 47% of 25 to 34-year-olds are turning to friends, relatives, and colleagues for help, which I think is a really interesting statistic there. You know, that's a lot, you know, that's nearly half of each of those demographics that are looking to their relatives and potentially their parents and looking to see who they use, which will drive them to how they got their wills.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I, you know, personally, I think that whole changing demographic, what we've just been talking about there is where they're going to go for, and how, you know, that high street solicitor or the will writer can attract that younger market is very much into those online services. Now, just picking up on the statistics here, so there are 18.6 million people that have a will. You know, we talked about that earlier. But 4% started to prepare a will themselves and then turned to the legal advisor to complete it, which I think is about 8%. So how can we reach, you know, looking at that demographic, how can we reach and support those that are trying to complete the will themselves? How do we get them to look for that advice? How do we start building those relationships? How do we start building trust, you know, with those future clients who are looking at engaging in a different way?
Just going back to what you said about the number of wills that are owned, 18.6. That's based on our survey. As you know, there are no official statistics on how many wills there are. You know, there's the National Will Register, but it's not compulsory. So that's based on our survey, but you know, it's as good as we can get, I think, at the moment, because it's, you know, there's no other way of calculating it. In terms of how you get people to think about wills more, again, we talked about the financial planning side, but I also think that, and some of the big law firms, again, and actually some of the new providers are doing this. They're basically saying, well, just answer this questionnaire online, which will cover most of the things in your will, and then we'll get a legal professional to have a look at it, and they'll draft the will. So they're getting the client to do most of the legwork, but the client feels in control of that because they're doing it. But actually, it's being completed at relatively low cost by a legal professional at the end. And I think that is the way that will attract particularly younger adults to thinking about making a will. They're not going to walk into a law firm and say, oh, I've thought about making a will. So I think that's one answer. And I say some of the big law firms and people like Fairwill are doing this already. They're you know, they're marketing their services online, essentially. The thing about recommendations is interesting because, of course, if you're an older adult, I don't know, 55 and beyond, you probably already used a law firm in the past, and you go back to that law firm very often. It's another example of convenience in a way. An older adult they go back to somebody they know, and they found the service okay. They
They
don't
have
even
that trust. They have that trust, don't they?
they don't even know if they do wills in many
Yeah,
cases. They
yeah, yeah.
and then they'll do it. Obviously, a younger adult doesn't have that experience, so I think friends, relatives, work colleagues are still really important,
Yeah.
and I don't see that changing. Even if will writing and probate services move online,
Yeah.
younger adults will still ask people who they used and whether they found them useful.
Yeah, and I think younger adults also will use things like, like the trip advisor for when they go on holiday. They use Google
Yeah.
surveys and things like that, won't they? Recommendations on
Yeah.
there as well.
And that in terms of legal services, I mean, reviews on things like TripAdvisor and Google reviews
Yeah,
have increased dramatically in the last couple of years. So
yeah,
I think that and law firms and will writers are embracing that now. 5 or
yeah,
6 years ago, if you'd said to particularly a law firm, but also others, oh, why don't you start putting reviews on Trustpilot,
yeah,
respond and engaging with Trustpilot, they
yeah,
would have been horrified. But now they see it as a marketing tool,
yeah.
and they understand that those review sites are important. So I think, yes, again, that's another way that you will bring in internet savvy users into that process.
Yeah, because when you look at millennials, and millennials are now, the oldest millennials are in their 40s, they have got, assets. So, they might be owning their own houses, they might be married, they might be having children, getting divorced, whatever it happens to be. They're in that kind of bracket where all those changes are happening. So they are, key life events that would drive the need for a will. And I think we all know, I mean, I know working with the millennials in the office here, they do everything on their phone and they do it with immediacy. They want it. And if they've decided they want it now. They don't want to wait and, phone up on Monday and book an appointment to go in to see somebody in their office in 3 weeks' time. They want to do it now. They've made that decision. And as you say, taking those instructions online, going through to that legal professional who they might have had a recommendation or seen on Trustpilot, that they can do it immediately and feel that like they've started that process, I think is really important. And I would say, wouldn't I, but technology can really help with that from an efficiency perspective and from an immediacy perspective.
In our survey, 35 to 44-year-olds, only 16% have got a will. That's half. Well, it's half the survey average. So it's very, very low.
Yeah.
And it hasn't changed much over the last 5 years. And
I mean,
you're right,
pandemic, isn't it?
Yeah, and the point you raised about life events, again, I think that's a trick that a lot of providers miss. When they buy a house, they should be trying to sell them a will at the same time. If they get a divorce, it's not a great bad time.
Yeah.
But you need to start thinking about your future. And again, I think that's a trick that is missed by a lot of providers. They don't.
Absolutely. Cross-sell and upsell and
trying to cross-sell, yeah.
And for me, it's not selling, it's actually helping the clients.
Yeah, absolutely. It's part of the advice package. Yeah, absolutely.
And I do think when you talk to like a financial advisor, for example, they will always talk about make sure you've got something in place for your money if the worst happens. So I think it is very important that it's looked at more holistically within firms that have got that opportunity. Absolutely.
And can I just throw one more stat?
Go on.
Sorry to keep throwing these out.
I don't know, it's great.
One of the other survey points was that 27% of adults who have a mortgage do not have a will. Wow. Now, that's not, okay, it's not a huge percentage. It suggests that most people who have a mortgage do have a will. But there's still 27%. And the biggest group in that category are, again, in that age group, 35 to 44. So I think there are opportunities there as well to... if you're taking out a mortgage and you're doing the conveyancing, you should be trying to say to people always, it's sensible to have a will. You've got an asset. Especially
if they're cohabiting, they're not married.
Yeah.
You think, again, that demographic, they're more likely to be living together, not necessarily married, or I'm not saying they're more likely, but, there's a chance that they're living together as opposed to getting married. And that obviously is a massive trigger for if they're buying property or etc., that they need to make sure that they're all covered there.
And one more stat, you might be talking about this later, I'm not sure, but of the ones who haven't got a will, 45% say they've not got round to it.
Yeah.
Now that's not a fundamental reason for not having a will. It's not like I haven't got any assets, I can't afford to make a will. It's just that other things have taken over and they just haven't got around to it. But it just seems to me that's a huge percentage that have actually thought about it, but just haven't done it. And again, it's an opportunity, I think, that is being missed and could be, you're right, I think could be, some of those could be attracted through marketing through online solutions and online delivery.
Absolutely. If you would make the whole process easy for the consumer, then, if they're thinking about it, they might go that step further and actually do it because it's easy for them to do. And we know that it's never an easy thing to talk about, is it?
No, absolutely. But again, if you
subject, but planning for it should be an easy process.
I'd come back to the point I made earlier. I don't think you go along with the bold statement, or you need to make a will. You go along with a more kind of measured approach and a more broader approach that says, well, you need to plan for your future, which includes lots of things.
Plan for your future, plan for your family's future. Yeah, absolutely. So picking up on the last point then, the last key area that we pulled out of the consumer report was about this expanding service portfolio. And we've touched on it earlier in what we've been speaking about. But while take-up of additional services such as living wills, retirement planning services, funeral plans, it's still relatively low. The use of those services is likely to grow as many survey respondents expressed an interest in at least one of these extra services, which I think is fascinating now to bring that picture together as you were talking about. So advice on setting up lasting power of attorneys remains that most popular additional service. So lasting powers is really interesting there. So offering these additional services, just expanding on the point you made earlier, that can help the wills become more profitable. So which service have you seen the most increase in on the surveys there? We talked about lasting powers, but
well, you're right about lasting powers of attorney, although that's already the highest use. And we asked two questions. We asked people, do you use any of these services, or have you used any of these services in the last 2 years? And then we asked them, would you be interested in any of these services going forward? So it's two separate questions. And yes, lasting powers of attorney are the most popular service use, which is you'd expect, as aging population, etc. People need to get advice on that. But it's not the one that has grown. It's not the one that people say they would, in terms of which one they're most interested in going forward. That's probably the best way of saying it. That's not the one that attracts the most interest, because there's still more would use it, but it's not the biggest interest. The two that are, and I think these are interesting, particularly the first one, is tax planning, which is the term we put in the survey. You could have said financial planning, but we put inheritance tax and related tax planning. And only 3% of people have actually used those services up to now from our survey, but 11% said they would be interested in using. Now, okay, it's still a relatively small number, but it's nearly 4 times the amount who are using services now. So I think that's really important. It comes back to the point we've raised before about financial planning, and maybe that's how you approach this whole thing. But I think that's really important. And the other one is funeral plans, which essentially 11% have used in the survey up to now, and 20% would consider a funeral plan going forward. So they were the two that attracted the most interest, I think, going forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
But quite a few of the others did as well, but not as big a leap as those two. So I think that is definitely the way forward, I think, to start to think about offering additional services beyond the will writing service.
Absolutely. And we've seen just in the work that we're doing, I mean, we did a webinar recently about trusts, and we had 400 people interested in that webinar, sign up for that webinar, because I think the trust, that tax planning, that making sure as the wealth's coming through, that great wealth transfer piece again, making sure that they're doing everything that they need to do in order to basically pass the majority of the money on, if they can, to their children or their families. So you know, you can definitely see that. Funeral plans is an interesting one as well. You know, that's almost doubled. So yeah, so we can see a lot of those coming in the next few years. So as part of that, then, with the expanding portfolio, do you see estate planning blending into other service sectors in the future, such as the financial planning we talked about?
Yeah, I do actually. I think it seems to me a logical kind of marriage in a way
Yeah.
that you would expect. You know, if you're talking about financial planning going forward, and tax planning going forward, even if your assets are not particularly large, if you need to have somebody who is helping you with your financial planning, it seems logical that they should then at least offer the opportunity to help you with, let's call them personal services. They're not really, but you know what I mean. Beyond the kind of tax and financial planning, things like maybe care home planning, funeral plans, prepaid probate plans. And I know there are issues there because they're not regulated, but I think all these things are part of the same package, that you need to think about all these issues alongside your kind of very narrow financial planning issues you might have.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Great. So I mean, that when we see the consumer survey in its totality there's a real opportunity to for those who are wanting to increase their business. So we're seeing that there's an opportunity to go after these that don't have a will but have started thinking about it. We've seen that through our client base as well, I would say. You know, a lot of clients are seeing their volumes increase dramatically. But with the fixed prices, the changing in habits of these clients, people need to change, look at ways of becoming more efficient. I mean, we ran a client survey recently, and efficiency and making wills profitable was by far the biggest business driver for this year. So it's interesting how they align very closely there. Is there anything else from the consumer survey you'd like to bring out before we move on to the industry survey?
The only thing I'd add is, in these difficult times, it's interesting that the number of people who have left something in their will to a charity or would do that,
oh yes,
has increased. And it's increased over the last 3 waves of the survey we've done. So that would be, I think it was 19, 18, 20. It might be 19, 20 and this one.
Yeah.
And it's increasing gradually, which I think is quite interesting.
Yeah.
And maybe is another opportunity. I know lots of law firms are involved with various charities and with charitable organizations, but it may be another way in which you can bring people into the will writing process by.
I know a lot of people get involved in the free wills, don't they? And the drivers in, there's a couple of those that happens each year. So that's really interesting to see that obviously is making a big difference, and seeing those legacy elements within the wills as well. Brilliant. Well, thank you for that, for the consumer report. Like I said, it's a great read, and we'll tell you a little bit later about how you can get your own hands on them if you would like a copy. So if we move on to the industry report itself now, and have a look there. So it's fantastic to see that the industry is growing, albeit a little bit fragmented, but a value of 2.5 billion, which is an increase of 5.6% on the 2021. So looking at some of the stats here we've got up on the screen. So the market is worth 2.5 billion. That's an increase of 5.6 over 2021. Deaths are decreasing a little bit following the pandemic. 54% of wills were done by a solicitor and 23% by a specialist will writer. LPAs are growing during a dip during a pandemic, but have grown 5.5% up in the last year. So what would you say just generally are your top trends that you feel are happening in the industry now?
Okay. Well, I suppose the drivers for growth in the last year, 18 months have been probate, first of all, advice on probate after a death in this case. And we have to mention the pandemic as one of the key factors behind that. Obviously, and sadly, there were a huge amount of deaths in 2020, early 21. And that has driven a huge increase in demand for probate. And even though deaths are falling now in 2022, probate backlogs, for example, and delays in getting things sorted mean I think that demand will continue for a little while longer. I mean, the general trend and the long-term trend is for deaths to decrease year on year because of improvements in medical treatments, health and safety issues. But obviously there was this big spike in deaths in 2020 particularly, which has pushed demand for probate. And in terms of the growth that we put in for last year, a large part of it is due to that. I think secondly, we've mentioned legal powers of attorney. There was a dip in demand for those in 2020. I think because people had other things on their mind, you know, there were a lot of other issues to deal with. They're increasing quite significantly now. The figure in the report is for the first half of 2022, the latest data we have, I think, and they increased by 12.5% in the first half of 22, the numbers, compared to the first half of 21. The new figures actually will be out this week. So just as an aside, I will give you those new figures after the webinar. They'll be out today or Thursday, but I will give you the figures and you can pass those on to the participants if you want.
Brilliant. Thank you. That would be really useful.
They're increasing again, so there's big demand there. We talked about will writing as being this low fee, low margin business. But it's still growing, and the reason for that is, and I should have mentioned this earlier, really, is although the percentage of people with a will is not changing very much, you know, it's about 35 to 40%, depending on which survey you read, but they're all about roughly around the same area. But of course, the population of the UK is increasing year on year, and the older population is increasing even much more strongly than the rest of the population. So it's a percentage that's not changing, but it's a percentage of a growing population that's changing.
Popular market.
Actually, the number of wills is increasing year on year. So there is market growth there, although it's not particularly strong.
Absolutely. Well, let's explore about that, because there was 4 key themes that we kind of picked out of this report as well, and market growth was one of them, plus contentious claims, plus power of attorneys, and digital adoption. So let's pick up those 4 key themes as we go. So the pandemic increased the demand for will writing services, and demand for probate work is continuing to increase. We picked that out. The market value is forecast to increase by 5.2% in 2023. So we're still seeing the market grow. And between 2022 and 2026, forecast of 4.6%. So the UK's got that aging population, you say, with medical changes, etc. People are living longer. Diseases like dementia are becoming more common. 80% of firms are confident in the report that there's going to be more work in the year ahead, and they're expecting that increase of workload. So, you know, can you expand on those market stats? I think it's fascinating to see where the market's going to go.
I think the market trends that we've just talked about actually will continue in 23. So although deaths are falling, I still think there is this pent-up demand for probate advice, which is carrying on from a couple of years ago. So that'll continue. We talked about lasting powers of attorney, again, big increase in demand for those. And wills will continue to increase. The numbers of people with wills will increase because of the growing population, as I said. I think some of the other areas, more and more, and you might find this odd given that we've just been talking about the fact that a lot of law firms don't see will writing as particularly important. But, you know, there are 6,000 plus, and I think a chunk of those, both at the top of the market and in the middle market, do understand the value of selling other services. And I think this will start to develop much more strongly in the next year, and probably, well, and onwards, the next 5-10 years. We'll start to see much wider range of additional services being pushed to people who might be interested in them. Again, I go back to the point that at the moment, it's more like, okay, you want a will, well, think about these other services. I think that will change. The marketing of that will change. it'll be much
more
about
holistic
which
approach.
services do you want? Which services do you want?
Yeah.
And it will be like that, I think. So I think all those things will affect the market and keep it growing.
Yeah.
So it might be surprising again that 80% of people said that they saw the market growing.
Yeah.
But again, that I talked about that some law firms do very little will writing work. That's a survey we do every year of a small sample of suppliers in the industry, about 120.
Yeah.
But it is spread across large players and small players. But most of them again see the probate side, the powers of attorney side. If you dig down into those figures, they're not necessarily seeing will writing as the bit that's going to drive growth. It's other stuff.
Yeah. But I think the complexity of wills will also change. You know, and we've done a white paper recently on the great wealth transfers we've been talking about a little bit earlier on. You know, so the money is going to change. There's a lot more blended families, a lot more complexity within that, you know, with greater wealth and complex family situations that will drive the need for sort of more complex wills. So therefore the average price of wills, you know, may also increase as part of that.
Yeah, and that brings us on to the whole question of contentious wills, I suppose.
Absolutely, yeah.
Shall I pick that up now? But you're right. There are, for the reasons you've suggested, more complex family structures. Also, think just the very fact that more people have more wealth. I know we're in tough times at the moment, but over the longer term, yes, people are going to have more assets and more wealth.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And again, I think COVID had a big effect on the contentious wills market because for lots of reasons. People died without updating their wills. People sadly had to make wills very quickly.
Yeah.
Weren't always drafted very well, or there were issues around mental capacity of people who were making wills at that time.
Yeah.
Again, creates all kinds of issues, and even the video witnessing of wills has led to a growth in claims against wills because of questions about how reliable it is for a video witnessing process to actually have valid witnesses. So a whole range of reasons, I think, for the contentious wills market to increase. And if, again, in our report, we look at the Law Society database, and on that, law firms they list basically what services they offer. And the number of law firms saying they offer contentious wills or contentious probate advice has doubled between 2018 and 2022.
Wow.
So in a market, you know, which, as you say, is fragmented, there are bits of it that are growing, bits of it that are not growing quite as well. The contentious wills and probate sector of the market is growing quite significantly.
And that because the complexity as well, if somebody's put a very simple will or done a DIY will themselves without understanding what they should put in place, will naturally lead that. So I mean, I think from our clients as well, we've definitely seen the contentious will part of their business grow and expand over the last few times. Let's talk a bit more about powers of attorney. I know you touched on them earlier. So the number of applications to register a power of attorney in England and Wales has been increasing year on year. However, there was a 19.5% decrease in applications in 2020, part of the pandemic there. And the decrease may also deal with the fact that will be due to the fact that law firms have changed their process to deal with office closures and home working and all of that, what we saw there. But how's the power of attorneys, you know, how's that changed now in the most recent survey that you've seen?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, essentially, since about 2014, maybe 15, the number of powers of attorney has grown every year, apart from 2020, as you say, in the midst of the pandemic. And it's obvious reasons: aging population, living longer. Suffering from more illnesses, particularly dementia, but other illnesses as well. And so that's created a demand for more powers of attorney. Basically, it's as simple as that, I think. The 2020 decrease, yeah, it was partly to do with law firms closing their offices, home working, and so on. People not being able to see a lawyer.
Yeah, the
Also,
OPG as well, being able to put them through.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, you're right. The kind of government departments in the same position. They couldn't deal with them basically. So
Yeah.
that I think that was a one-off, sadly, but they're increasing again. And as I said earlier, there's been a big increase. Well, there's a big increase of about 5.5% in numbers in 2021,
Okay.
and the figures we have so far. There's been an increase of 12, just over 12% in
Okay.
2022. So the final figures will be out this week.
Yeah.
So it's yeah, it's a market that's going to keep on growing. I think I don't see any way that will change because there'll be more older people simply,
Yeah.
and more people living longer. So
And I do think there's been some high profile cases like Kate Garraway, for example, during the pandemic, very sadly. Obviously, everything was in her husband's name and she could not access anything. And that
yeah,
created a huge amount of stress for her. And she's been very vocal about that. So I think there's growing awareness. And I think also, we talk back about the demographics and we talk about the millennials. I think a lot of millennials are now helping because a lot of it's online. They're helping their parents or indeed their grandparents to put these things in place and having those experiences, which will hopefully increase demand that everybody has them in place as well.
Yeah, and you're right. COVID has actually led to that increase in demand to some extent. You're right.
Yeah.
People for the first time understanding why they need one, if you like,
Yeah.
or why their older parents, relatives need one. Yeah, absolutely right.
Absolutely. Just picking up on trusts as well. So the number of trusts registered has been falling year on year, and this trend continued in 2021 with 145,000 registered compared to 154 in 2020. Great to delve into why you think this is happening.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on trusts, and that's why we don't say a lot about them in the report.
Yeah.
But the main reason why the numbers are falling are all to do with changes in the tax regime, and I'm certainly not going to delve into that today because I don't know the full details. But I know that for some trusts that have to pay tax, the tax burden has become stronger or has increased in the last few years. So that is a major reason why the figures at the moment are showing a decline in the trust that we put in the report. I think the point you made earlier about the spread of wealth to further the age groups actually might see much more interest in trusts as we move forward.
We are actually seeing an increase in demand of trust actually here.
But I think again that fits in with this idea that you need to take a holistic approach, because if you're going to go down the trust route, then you need somebody to advise you on the tax issues and so on. And then again, that might lead you to think about all these other things.
About trust as well. Brilliant. Well, the fourth key part of the market report there is all about digital adoption. So again, we're seeing the majority of firms that complete wills are solicitors, then that's followed by will writers. And there's a very few pure online will writing companies, but roughly 50 so far. Many also offer do-it-yourself LPAs and probate services. Some will offer checking of a DIY will by a legal professional for additional cost, etc. Video witnessing you've spoken about has been extended to 2024. And the Ministry of Justice wants to digitize that whole LPA process. So do you think really see some early signs of digital transformation now in the planning industry?
Yeah, I do actually. Given the reservations I've already said about some of the smaller firms, I do in many ways. And you're right. I mean, even the smaller firms, depends what you mean by digital transformation, but even the smaller firms can do a Zoom call and if they want to consult online. But I do think, and I would separate out what I would call the online services that have been around for years. That basically you just buy a template off a website and take it away and do your own will. I don't really mean, when I say pure online will writing services, I don't really mean those kind of services. I mean ones that you can start the process off online. We talked about this earlier, but then you have a legal professional who looks through what you've written. And if you look at big volume players, Irwin Mitchell, Slater and Gordon, Co-op, they're all moving towards that.
Yeah.
It's more efficient for them. They want people to start the process online.
Yeah.
And they're all offering services now that do that.
Yeah.
And obviously, there are new disruptors into the market as well that we know that are doing exactly the same.
Yeah.
Where they're offering this kind of online approach, but still with still with a legal professional putting the final touches to it and making sure it's okay. I can see that.
Yeah.
Certainly amongst the volume players and a lot of the players that are dealing with enough wills a year. I mean, I'd be really interested to know from Arkin. I'm not asking you to do it now, but I'd be really interested to know if Arkin have got any idea where the cutoff point is for a provider of wills to think about buying software to improve the process.
Yeah.
Is it it's probably not somebody who does 100 wills a year, but is it somebody who does 1,000 or 5,000? As I say, I'm not asking you to answer now, but I think that's.
But I don't think it matters in terms of volumes, to be honest. I think it's about their business model, it's about their processes, it's about what they're trying to achieve and what else they offer. You know, people are looking much more now to digitize that whole will instruction piece. They're looking to make the whole will drafting, you know, much more efficient. And of course, I'm talking to those that are very open to doing that to get the efficiency piece, but also that risk management piece, the consistency of document production throughout. So I think it really depends on the individuals and their appetite to digitize. And I think some new people that are coming into the market, they want digital straight from the off. I think there's some more traditional firms that are slower to change, but I think there is an appetite to change now, and I think people are realizing they have to change now to keep up, because as you rightly say, there's a lot of disruptors there in the marketplace. So yes, I do think we are seeing this digital adoption changing, and people have got to think to the future, because they've got to think about how they're going to engage with those millennial type clients that wants that immediacy that we were talking about earlier.
It's similar to other legal consumer markets where disruptors are coming to the market with starting with a digital solution straight away. Good. And then that drives more of the traditional players to do the same. They have no choice, really. It's ironic. The traditional players, the big ones, are doing many more wills than the disruptors. They really should be leading the market, but they're not. It's the disruptors that nearly always lead the market into the next stage. And that's happening in the wills and probate sector now.
And I think it's an interesting one as well, because I think people still want that trust and reassurance that a solicitor has looked at it, so they might be happy to put everything in, but just to have that rubber stamped by a professional in will writing, I think is still a consumer bias, if you like.
And I think that will still be for many a face-to-face consultation, maybe not in person, but I think the idea that they can still talk to somebody and see them on a screen, I think is quite important, and I think that will continue.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything else that you want to pick up from the market report there to share with our viewers today?
I don't think so. I think that's about it really on that one. I think it's maybe of all the consumer markets at the moment, consumer law markets, sorry, it is the most intriguing going forward, because we have all these different bits of it in a way. In the 10 years ago, we tended to talk about the wills market, but now, as we've discussed through this session, it's much more than that now, and there are real opportunities in some areas, but maybe not in others. And I think that is the difference between this market and, say, personal injury or conveyancing, where the markets are much tighter and the struggle to make revenue and profits is much harder, I think, in those sectors. I think wills and probate, along with probably family law, are the two consumer law areas that we see offering the best potential for growth going forward. That again is an interesting one, because if family law is growing as well, why are family lawyers not trying to sell to their clients the kind of things you've been talking about today, crucial to families. You know, they're at the centre of family life, and I think
And
that's
it's about law firms having that cradle to grave service, isn't it? There's going to be different things throughout somebody's life, whether that is conveyancing, whether it is family, you know, law issues there, you know, and they should be with them and updating their will throughout their life and having that cradle to grave kind of relationship with them. Which is really important as well, I think, with this great wealth transfer, because they want to keep the clients and they want to keep where the money's going and keep advising and helping them manage that in the most tax efficient way.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Fantastic. So in summary there, we've got a growing market. The dynamics of the market are changing. Consumers are changing. We're getting aging demographics. The ways people want to engage are changing. People are becoming more contentious around wills due to the complexity of the market these days. So it really is quite an interesting time to be in the wills and probate industry, isn't it?
I think it is. Yeah, I think it. You know, it's still challenging, but I think it's an interesting one. I think the Brilliant. More innovative providers can develop quite strongly if they embrace some of these changes. Yeah, I think so.
Absolutely. Fantastic. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about the IRN legal reports right now. Okay. If anybody wants to ask a question, please use the question button on your Zoom, and we'll take as many as we can as time allows. But we will come back to you if we haven't been able to answer your question at that point. So just tell us a little bit about IRN legal reports then, David.
Okay, thank you. Excuse me. Yeah, IRN legal reports actually only started last year, but it was spun out of my previous business, which was called IRN Research, and we were a research and report writing consultancy for the legal sector, basically. But we split the business up. So the research business, and these are bespoke projects for law firms, other legal providers, legal regulators. That part of the business, commission research for those clients, has moved somewhere else, but I can tell you about it if you're interested any time. And I am now completely responsible for the report writing, and we write a whole series of reports every year, grouped into two categories. One are market reports and the other one's are consumer survey reports, and we talked about both of those today in relation to this particular market. In the market report series, we focus on consumer law markets. So we do wills and probate, personal injury, family law, conveyancing, and a general one about the legal services market. And on the consumer survey side, we do regular reports on wills and probate, personal injury, and conveyancing, those three mainly. And these have been coming out for many, many years, probably. So even though the name has changed, the reports are still the same, essentially. So we've been tracking these sectors for at least 10 years, a bit longer in some cases. So that's a very quick summary. If you need more information, we have a website, irnlegalreports.com. You can email me if you want to find out more about these particular reports we talked about today.
Yeah.
And we can offer a discount on both reports. If you email me, I'll tell you what they are rather than
fantastic. And we're sharing we're sharing those details on the screen now. So if anybody needs to or wants to contact David, then please feel free to do so. For those of you that don't know Arken, before my throat gives out, we're all about providing industry-leading estate planning software. We're looking there at driving efficiency, profitability, consistency, that risk management approach, and supporting lead generation as well. So we've got loads of different tools. The prime heart of our product suite is our will drafting software that allows for incredibly complex wills. So please do get in touch if you would like any further information. The kind of products we do are there for you on the screen right now. So I'm just going to ask my lovely assistant Beth, who's been sitting here very patiently looking at questions. Have we got any questions for us to answer at the moment?
We do. I have one question here. It's about how can companies expand into offering other services like financial planning or funeral plans? I think we mentioned.
So the tax side of it, or the funeral plans. Are we seeing many firms do that, David? Do you know about how they expand out into those other services?
I've seen one or two. Apart from the big ones, I would say it's essentially very difficult to suddenly bring that into the business. I appreciate that in terms of costs and resources, but I think a lot of partnerships are happening where you partner with a financial planning company or consultants or maybe even an accountant. And you offer joint services, things like that is one way of doing it. I think that's an obvious one. That's the major one I've seen in one or two cases.
I think some firms might have tax specialists anyway that they might have on the business side of things that they can tap into. And I think there's a lot of funeral service plans out there from a partnership perspective as well.
I think the other thing as well, a lot of the high street firms are seriously looking at their practice areas now. And quite a lot have already reduced numbers in, if you like, the traditional practice areas, like conveyancing, for example, or definitely personal injury. Quite a lot have actually closed their personal injury teams because of changes in that sector. And as part of that process, they are looking at switching resources. So I suspect more firms will start to, if they're offering a portfolio of services across a lot of consumer law markets, I'm sure more and more will start to look at some of these and think, well, we don't need to do that anymore, but maybe we should push the resources away from that into tax planning, financial planning, that kind of thing. So there is an opportunity, I think, for a lot of firms to start to reallocate resources. So we might see more taking on some of this new expertise, I think.
Great. Any more questions there?
Yeah, we've got one more question here, and I think it's more of a what's your opinion type question around video witnessing and how secure we think it is. We don't think it is.
Ooh. That's probably one for you, isn't it? I think. We haven't done any work on it, to be honest. I mean, I appreciate there is debates about this, and we touched on it a little bit.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I went to a Women in Wills event recently, and a barrister was talking there, and she was talking about not just video witnessing, but videoing wills in general. So she was talking about the fact of contentious claims because of the increase in contentious wills, that she really felt that videoing wills or a message around why somebody perhaps hasn't been included in the will or why they've made the choices that they've made, having that on video could actually stop a lot of the contentious wills because you're actually hearing it from the horse's mouth, if you like. So, I think video witnessing is something every person needs to decide for themselves, I suppose, whether that's something they feel comfortable with. It is definitely something we offer the ability to do through IRN. But yes, it is interesting that whole videos around wills and will taking, although there may be some concerns and worries, may be something we see more in the future.
I mean, I should say there that, of course, the extension to video witnessing is only till January 24 at the moment. So there may be another, well, there will be another decision on that at the start of next year. But I think, given the way it's, I mean, I know some solicitors won't even consider it. But I think the way it's going is I would expect that video witnessing of wills will become fairly, not standard, but it will certainly be a feature of the industry that will be there for a long time.
And the whole digitization of the industry. I think we're coming up upon time, so I think any other questions that are there now we'll come back to you individually with, which thank you very much for that. So we will be sending a survey out, or a survey will pop up, I think, when this closes here. We'd love to get your feedback, and indeed if there's any other webinars you'd like to hear from them, please let us know. But a massive thank you to David today for your time. The reports are a fascinating read. There's a lot more detail in there than we've had chance to talk about today. And I really wish we had longer to delve into the wonderful detail that's in there. So thank you very much. And we look forward to being here again in a year's time to actually talk about the next year's reports. So a massive thank you from us, David. And a thank you for all of the people that have joined us and come on to listen to us today. So goodbye from me.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you very much.